An author once said that every person's life is worthy of a novel. Unfortunately, though, seldom when their stories are told are the most amazing parts revealed. Welcome, friends, to where we give you the entire amazing story. After 4 months of daily brutal interrogations and savage beatings, Irena was finally sentenced to death. It was to take place at sunrise the following morning by a firing squad. The date, January 20th, 1944, almost exactly 1 month before Irena's 34th birthday. As Irena lay moaning on the bare slats of the wooden cot in her cell, waves of excruciating pain swept throughout her body, radiating from the shattered bones in her lower legs and feet, compliments of her Gestapo guards. Silently, she prayed to God, giving thanks for the strength to not betray her fellow resistance members, and more importantly, the location and names of the Jewish children she managed to smuggle from the Warsaw Ghetto. Her death, it seemed to Irena, would almost be a welcome release from the daily horrors she'd been forced to witness and endure since the beginning of the German occupation of Poland. Irena had studied law and literature at the University of Warsaw, but then, in 1940, after the Nazis herded the Polish Jews behind the walls of the Warsaw Ghetto, Irena obtained false identification papers, allowing her to enter the ghetto as a nurse, bringing in badly needed food, clothing, and medicines to the often typhus-diseased occupants. And then, in 1942, after the Nazis began the extermination of the Jewish residents, Irena joined the Polish underground organization Zagota, where she quietly recruited a very tight-knit group of women that eventually grew to almost 25, and they began the rescue of the Jewish children. For the next 2 years, they smuggled youngsters and babies out in boxes, suitcases, and sometimes even coffins, usually after sedating them to quiet their cries. Others were spirited out through a series of basements and secret passages, every operation timed to the very second. Many years later, one of her rescued children told of waiting in darkness as German soldiers patrolled the ghetto streets. And then, once they'd passed, how he counted to 30 as Irena had instructed, then ran into the middle of the street where a manhole cover slid back, and he was led down into the sewers and eventually safety. Most of the rescued children were placed in Roman Catholic convents and orphanages, or taken into Catholic homes and given non-Jewish names and taught Catholic verses should they be questioned, while Irena meticulously recorded their true identities and those of their parents onto scraps of paper which she buried in jars in a friend's garden, her ultimate hope to reunite the families after the war. But then, on the morning of October 20th, 1943, as she was preparing once again to enter the ghetto, she was arrested at her home by the Gestapo and taken to Pawiak prison, where the daily beatings and interrogations began. After this last session, Irena eventually passed out. This had been by far the worst session she'd had to endure. Hours later, she was shaken into consciousness by a Gestapo officer. He whispered in the darkness that he'd accepted a bribe from her comrades in Zagato, and in the morning he would help her escape. He explained that her name would be added to the list of prisoners executed, but that beforehand he would turn her over to her waiting friends so she could go into hiding. Many years later, Irena's comrades said that Irena began rescuing children long before she joined the resistance, and that she'd also helped a number of adults escape, including the man who eventually became her husband. We believe that altogether, Irena saved about 500 people before she joined Zagota, one friend said, which would mean that Irena ultimately helped to rescue approximately 3,000 Polish Jews. After the war ended, Irena unearthed the buried jars and began her attempt to reunite the children with their families. Unfortunately, for the vast majority, there were no family members left alive, so many of the children were adopted by Polish families while others were sent to Israel. Years later, as stories of her wartime heroism began to be told, Irena was presented with many honors, including the Polish Commander Cross, the Order of the White Eagle, the Polish American Award for Courage and Heart, and the Order of the Smile. And then, in 2007, at age 97, Irena Sendler was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for her heroism and humanitarian efforts during the war. Unfortunately, she was ultimately not selected. Instead, Al Gore won for a slideshow presentation he put together on the controversial subject of global warming. And now you know the rest of Irena Sendler's amazing story.